Hey, so last time we were discussing that sort of age of exploration, and we finished up with a separate video on how the Protestant Reformation played into that. We're going to rewind just a smidge and talk about early efforts at colonization on what kind of things happened once we create the right conditions for these voyages of exploration. So in 1492, most everybody's kind of heard this part. 1492, Christopher Columbus is going to, on his second attempt at trying to convince Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, he gets them to sponsor a voyage of exploration. And like we said with the Renaissance and the discussions of Galileo, the world being a globe had already been accepted. It's been accepted for 1,000 years at this point. Um, there's some other disagreements on how large the globe is, but Columbus did not set out to prove that the world was round. Most people accepted that. The thing that Columbus did get wrong, and something that he was thinking would be, is North America was not present on the globes being produced in Europe in the late 1400s. And so the thing that Columbus gets wrong is he thought that the globe was much smaller than it actually is. And that's going to be problematic on his voyage here in a second. But in 1492, he sets sail with a small fleet, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, and they set sail across the Atlantic. Toward the end of their journey, a week or two before they actually sight land, his crew gets pretty restless and they threaten to mutiny. And part of the argument there is Columbus has underestimated the size of the globe, and many of them thought that, hey, we should have encountered land by now. Maybe this is just open sea out here, and if we don't turn around, we're not going to have enough, food and water to actually make it back to Europe. And so there was a serious concern that these guys had. Columbus kind of makes a deal with them to get them to continue on a little bit longer, and luckily within a week or so they do sight land. On October the 12th, 1492, one of the lookouts saw an island that was in the present-day Bahamas. And they spent a couple of months exploring some of these islands. After some exploration, on Christmas Day of 1492, the Santa Maria ran into a reef and sank. Some historians, and we don't really have anything to prove this with, other than it's kind of a convenient sort of a thing. Some historians argued that this was staged, unbeknownst to the vast majority of the crew, that this was staged as an effort to force a group of men to stay behind as a garrison, because you need boots on the ground in order to be able to hold territory, and this would force a group of those guys to remain behind. And Columbus did leave a sizable number of his men there on the islands. Unfortunately for them, when he returned in 1493, those guys had all died, possibly from disease, but a lot of them were killed by Native Americans themselves. And on the whole, Columbus makes another trip back, and he's given a governorship over some of his colonies, but he doesn't really have the ability to sort of realize that into a sizable fortune, and he dies a pretty disappointed man in 1506. But his big contribution was that he inspired a lot of other people to follow him. And, Spain is going to send a number of people, a number of other conquistadors to follow him. Just to run through a couple of these guys. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon went traipsing about through the swamps of Florida. He legit was looking for the fountain of youth. That was, if you find that, you get immortality for yourself, and that would be a tremendous commodity, make some serious money back in Europe. It doesn't exist. He didn't find it, but he thought it was there for some reason. But it does enable Spain to lay claim to Florida, and they will hold that until the 1800s. 1519 through 1521, Cortez is able to conquer the Aztecs and secure control of most of Mexico. Cortez didn't do this alone. He had the help of disease on the one hand, but he also had help from the neighbors surrounding the Aztec peoples. The Aztec peoples frequently led raiding parties into neighboring groups, and they would bring back people from these groups and sacrifice them to the sun god. Well, that's not going to be a neighborly thing to do. Your neighbors aren't going to like you if you do that. And so the neighboring peoples helped Cortez to overthrow the Aztecs. A little bit later, in 1531, Pizarro conquers the Incas down in Peru. Pretty quickly after him, Coronado is going to explore and claim much of the American Southwest, Texas, New Mexico, a little bit into Kansas, also for Spain. So after all of this, Spain has a pretty good foothold in the New World. For now, Portugal is going to lay claim to Brazil through a treaty that we'll talk about or we'll mention a little bit later on by the Pope that divides the world between Spain and Portugal. Nobody's really going to recognize that, but we'll try. And Spain has a claim on the rest of North and South America, but they primarily are going to focus on South America and a little teeny bit into North America. They don't really make large inroads into North America. They were here primarily to find gold and silver. That is going to be a commodity that they'll take hold of, especially in Mexico. And so they're going to hold Central America, South America, and a little tiny few outposts in what's now the United States. There are a couple along really the perimeter, a couple in Florida, a few in East Texas, a couple in New Mexico, and a couple in California. And really, these are basically going to serve as a picket line in military terms. They are just there to make sure and keep watch for other European powers that might infringe on Spanish holdings. They're going to argue that, hey, these are missions. We're here to try to convert the Native Americans to Catholicism. And that's a goal, but the primary thing is this is a warning system to try to make sure that other European countries don't kind of infringe on what's going on down here. So, ironically, though, Spain is pulling in a tremendous amount of money from their territories, and this is going to it's going to throw their economy, their domestic economy, into chaos. They, as strange as it sounds, the government of Spain approaches bankruptcy a couple of times. They're pulling in all this money, but prices on normal goods in Spain are going to, because you have a tremendous amount of money, we're going to see a tremendous amount of inflation. So the Spanish economy is pretty much in chaos in the mid 1500s. Also, the Spanish Empire has grown at a tremendously fast rate, and they're not able to hold on to all of it. They're not able to maintain control. And so in some of these areas, the Spanish subjects, especially the Native Americans, are going to revolt. And with a lot of money on the line and Spain in kind of a pretty tenuous position, other European countries are going to seek to challenge Spain. And so at various points, England, France, and Holland are all going to challenge Spain, especially for control of the sea. They want to be able to explore to the east and find these new territories and hopefully gain a foothold in them and make money just like the Spanish are. That's going to culminate in 1588. In 1588, we have the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the world's strongest navy, by England. And that knocks Spain down a few pegs. And so other countries are going to be able to lay claim in the colonies and not have that threat or as much of that threat anymore. We're going to run through a couple, just primarily the French and the British, because those are the two big rivals that are ultimately going to be there later on in North and South America. But the French had been exploring North America in the early 1500s. Jacques Cartier in the 1530s had explored and laid claim to Canada. So, keep in mind, Canada's way up there. He's not trying to infringe on Spanish holdings. That's going to create some problems for you. So he doesn't want to do that. Samuel Champlain, another Frenchman, is going to establish a couple of settlements in Canada in the early 1600s. Another Frenchman, Robert de La Salle, is going to sail down the Mississippi in 1681 and lay claims. He's going to lay claim to Louisiana for France. He comes back again in 1685. He accidentally misses the Mississippi and founded a small French settlement in East Texas. They have some domestic problems and abandon that pretty quickly, but Spain, like we said, Spain's got those pickets out there, those missions in East Texas, and so they're going to try to send a couple of patrols out to find that colony, but by the time they got there, the colony had been abandoned. But they are on top of things. They're trying to make sure that other European nations aren't infringing on what they've got. The British are going to be a little bit slow. Their first attempt to colonize part of North America is by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1586. And Raleigh establishes a colony at Roanoke. What's kind of interesting, most people have heard of the lost colony at Roanoke. This is not that. This is an earlier colony. They establish a colony. They come off as pretty hostile to the Native Americans, and they had worn out their welcome, basically. And there had been some back and forth skirmishing between the colonists and the Native Americans. And within a few months, luckily for the colonists, a different Englishman, Sir Francis Drake, arrived at the colony, just kind of, drop in sort of to check on the status of things. And the settlers there, after only a few months, were ready to quit. They were probably about to be overrun by Native Americans, and so Drake takes that group back to Europe. The next year, this is the part I find baffling. The next year in 1587, Raleigh is going to try again. Hey, that's a good idea. The bad idea is that he puts 110 settlers right back in Roanoke, and you're basically, you've stirred up a bunch of angry people, Native Americans. You've made them very angry, and then you're going to put another group right back there in the very same place. And so you've got some lingering animosity against English people from that group, and you're going to put another group there. And so he departs 1587, goes back to England to bring more supplies, but as luck would have it, the English are gearing up for war with the Spanish, where we're going to have that defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And so Raleigh is delayed in getting back. When he gets back, nobody's there. And so they were, honestly, most of them were probably wiped out by the Native Americans that were, stirred up and, started down that road of hostility by the previous group. After that, it's about 20 years before the English try again. Next, we have Jamestown Colony, established in 1607. Uh, that colony is going to struggle for about a decade. They initially, the goal was, hey, the Spanish are making money. They're extracting gold from the ground in mines. Maybe we can do the same thing. They thought that they had. They extract fool's gold, iron pyrite, which is worth nothing. And instead of farming and preparing for the winter, they are busy extracting iron pyrite. So a lot of the folks at Jamestown are going to die. Fortunately for that colony, though, in 1616, about a decade after they are established, a guy named John Rolfe, Rolfe, he developed a strain of a sort of a blend of tobacco that Europeans found absolutely palatable. And so that's the cash crop of Virginia. Uh, they're going to sell tobacco and traffic that back to Europe. And after Virginia has this cash crop that they can, support themselves and make a profit for the Virginia Joint Stock Company, more and more English people are going to pour into the Virginia colonies, the other colonies as well, and they're going to bring supplies and English settlements to the New World. And so that's kind of a very boiled down version of establishing these colonies, especially in the New World. Next time we're going to, instead of looking at North and South America, we're going to jump over to the other side of the world and look at a similar situation around the Indian subcontinent. So see you then.